Well, this is Memorial Day weekend. I want to extend an invitation to everyone to please be mindful that the weekend is Memorial Day weekend, which commemorates all those men and women in our military who lost their lives in the defense of our country. And I can't even begin to describe to you the number of books that I've read of people that saw our soldiers in all the wars going back, since our inception until the most recent history, and the loss of life that is incredible. I remember looking at this wall, that the Vietnam Wall, if you've ever been up to Washington, D.C., and you saw all those names, 45,000 names. But then I saw there was a little traveling memorial that came around that had a sort of an imitation Vietnam Wall, and they also had some banners out there that showed all the loss of life in all the wars. And I think the Civil War was one of the most deadliest. There was over 500,000 soldiers lost their lives during that war, and of course that was a war within our own the confines of our own country. But there have been countless thousands of people that have lost their lives in order for us to have. I saw this one post where this person is standing there looking out over like Arlington Cemetery, and he says, you know what, this weekend I'm not going to gripe about the cost of anything, because when you compare it to what those men, the cost that they paid, then it doesn't even match up, does it? It doesn't even make any sense. Our thoughts and prayers, though, do go out this week to the families and the victims of the school shooting down in Uvalde, Texas. I can't even, describe to you, I guess, either I'm sure that's a little Hispanic town. I've not been to Uvalde. I know where it's at. I used to sell to a concrete company that was in Uvalde, Texas. A little concrete company was one of my customers. That little elementary school there were 19 children, and ranging, I looked at the ages 9 to 11 years old. It's so sad. The teachers too, 44 and 48 years old, were killed. And a lot of people don't know that there were 18 people beside them that were injured, including what Mark mentioned, the grandmother who was shot in the face as a result of the shooting incident. It's one of the saddest in Texas history, and of course our whole nation, the whole nation is mourning over it. Judy was telling me that they set up a GoFundMe page for one of the people that was the teachers that was shot, and then her husband had a heart attack and he died. And so the children lost both of their parents within 24 hours or so, or 48 hours there. And she told me that there was already over $1 million, I believe, in this GoFundMe page, which is it's the outpouring of our nation, really, telling them how concerned and how unbelievable sorry they feel for them. It was a nightmarish situation that, well, no doubt what my mind goes through what will reverberate not only through those that remain, the siblings and the parents, the grandparents and the family members and the friends and even the community and, those around that community. They're going to be reeling for years. I mean, I'm sure some of those little children will have nightmares for years to come over this horrible incident. You just want to take them up in your arms and comfort them the best way you know how. You feel sort of helpless, I guess, and to reassure them that God is still in charge and that He's watching over us and He's aware of what is happening in our world, even though it's sometimes tragic, and He's deeply concerned and heartbroken over what happened. And to also tell them that God did not have a hand in this evil act. God, however, allows mankind to make his own decisions. We know that. We're given free moral agency to do whatever we want. I mean, I could drive out of here today, I guess, and go get in my car, buy a gun, and go rob a bank if I wanted to. I don't want to, but that I have the free moral agency, and no one is going to stop me unless it's a big old Texas deputy, maybe, or a highway patrolman sees me in the act. Maybe he'll stop me, and sure he would, but an angel is not going to stop me. God is not going to stop me from doing that. We have free moral agency. God allows things to happen, whether they're good or bad. We're allowed to make our own decision. He lets man plot his own course, make up his own mind, and decide to go whichever way he wants to go. And if he deviates from what God instructs him to do or disregards God's laws and his statutes and his judgments, God's way of life, then horrible consequences are inevitable. And they will happen, just like this incident took place. Not that these families, and I'll just want to reassure everyone that I believe that any of these families had anything to do with what happened there. I believe they're totally innocent victims. And I can't imagine the pain that they must be going through. It's a travesty. I can't imagine parents losing a child. I can't wrap my mind around that. And I know I laid awake nights thinking about what must be going through the minds of some of those parents. When you begin to look at the background and the upbringing and the specifics of this gunman, Salvador Ramos, 18 years old, perpetrator, I'm sure that the officials will look into every aspect of his life. I bet they're going to dig up every piece of evidence they can find on where he's been, what he did on the internet, what text he sent, emails, whatever it might be. But I wonder if they will ever consider all the bloody television programs that this kid ever watched in his lifetime. They tell me that children see 12,000 acts of violence per year on television. 12,000. And I think it's even more than that when you count up all the murders. Will they consider the hours spent that he probably did in front of criminal-type video games where shooting and killing and all of bloody, computer games that are available to kids? What the eyes of this young man and the forms of violence and the evil solution in most of these games are, when you got an aggravation or you have a problem, you just blow people away. That's the solution. And so his mind has been programmed and trained to react in such a way. Also, the witness that most children have to violence. Not only this violence is available to them on television and on the computer and on other forms of media that are available to him, but I was reading some of the statistics this morning that domestic violence, and I don't even believe these numbers. I think they're way more than that because I don't believe a very small portion of them are even reported. But a lot of kids have witnessed domestic violence within their own homes. They say 20% of adult women have been victims at least once of some form of domestic violence. And half the men that abuse their wives also will abuse the kids, unfortunately. And then there's community violence. I was reading that New Orleans did a study that said 90% of their children had witnessed some sort of violence in their city. That 50% had been a victim of some sort, and that 40% had actually seen a dead body. I didn't see a dead body till I was practically a grown man. A buddy of mine called me. I was in high school, and a guy had a heart attack and fell over dead, and the ambulance was right down the street, and we walked down the street, and we could see in the window there that a guy had just collapsed from a heart attack while sitting here watching TV. That was the first time I remember seeing, not the death by natural causes or something at a funeral or something, but out in the public eye. Los Angeles, children had witnessed they say that children have been witness to 10 to 20% of all the homicides. There was a child watching. In Boston, 10% of the children have witnessed a knifing or a shooting by the age of 6. 10%. That's hard to believe. And 77% of children in high violence families were also abused themselves. And of course, we know this often leads to their criminal activity and prison sentences. And you can go back and read the statistics about these people that are in prison, how they were abused and how they become criminal. And I won't even begin to quote to you the study that I read about from the Michigan University that gave statistics on how many abused women and children had suffered punches, hits, slaps, torture, cigarette burns, actually being bound for a certain period of time, broken bones, stab wounds, and gunshots. It broke it all down for you. I don't even want to sully the day here or this platform here by telling you all of those. But there's also I believe, a deep-rooted problem that may lie within the breakdown of the family. We've known this for years. The support group that a young man might have or a child might have. The inability to fit in socially. The frustration, especially at this critical age of 18. I know it's hard to remember when you were 18, but all the things that were going through your mind and all the pulls and tugs that you were having, both emotionally and, of course, the lack of discipline, the lack of training to control those emotions, and his anger to be carried out, and his frustration on innocent civilians by this cowardly act. And to exercise power over the weak and helpless is incomprehensible. It's incomprehensible. I mean, it's just totally devastating. Our hearts do weep, and we can scarcely bear what happened. I mean, I just didn't want to take it all in because it hurt too much to see what happened to these families. And we truly, like it tells us in Ezekiel, we sigh and cry for the abominations that we see around us. It's almost unfathomable, that we can't hardly believe that something like this happened in our state, and here just down the street from us, if you will. We grieve desperately, and we're almost helpless in wanting to comfort those victims. How does a city or a nation avoid these statistics that I read to you, and how do we combat these issues that seem only to become visible when there's this tragedy? We have to have a horrific tragedy for these topics to come up and even begin to address them. They happen every day. They're happening right now, but they're not in the news because it's not a political football that they can use to drive a party, line. Of course, it's going to be, they're going to take this party agenda business all the way. We'll be listening to that for the next months and weeks and months and maybe years ahead. And they'll be stating what happened here. Our children are one of the most precious gifts that we have. Our children. Someone who would purposely harm or enact violence upon an innocent child, to me, they don't deserve anything but instant justice. I was going to write in my notes, they don't even deserve to live. But that's a little harsh. But that's the way I feel about it. When I see someone abusive to a child or I hear these stories. But violence is a result of uncontrolled human nature and has always plagued society. We read in the very chapters early in the Bible here in Genesis that Cain slew Abel. The first family that walked the face of the earth out of jealousy. God told him that your sacrifice is really not up to par. You're not in the right attitude. And instead of correcting the problem, he grew embarrassed, red-faced. He was humiliated, insulted. And what did he do? He took it out on his brother and killed him. There in the very Garden of Eden, at the very beginning of the Word of God. The book of Ephesians tells us to be you angry and sin not. We can be angry, but we have to have controlled anger and not let our emotions completely get away from us. God gives some instructions to children and to parents in regard to this very fact. And I would like to read some of this today in Exodus 20th chapter. When God gave the 10 Commandments here, down in verse 12, he says, honor your father and your mother that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord has given you. That is the first thing. The New Testament tells us this is the first commandment with promise. It guarantees you a long life. If you want to live a long life, you do what this says. Now, did this young man do that by shooting his grandmother in the face? Certainly not, did he? So there was automatically a violation of the Word of God here. In Exodus 21, down in verse 15, look at this. Let's see, that's the wrong chapter. Exodus 21 in verse 15. I was in the wrong chapter. Follow me there. He that smites his father or his mother shall be put to death. Now, if a kid would take up his hand and a fist and take a swing at his mom and dad in ancient Israel, The result was put him to death. Now that seems harsh in our world today, doesn't it? How many Israelitish parents, though, ever let their kids get to that point after this law was given by God? Don't you think they would sit their kids down and say, don't you ever take a swing at your mom or your daddy, because the results are going to be very terrible? Do you think they taught their kids? I believe that they certainly did. Leviticus, the 19th chapter, over just a few pages here. Leviticus 19 and verse 32. You shall rise up before the hoary head, the gray-headed folks, and honor the face of the old man, and fear your God. I am the Lord. I saw this story the other day where a kid was pumping gasoline. This old man pulled up, and he was sitting there wobbling, holding his gas can, and the kid just pulled the pump out of his tank, reached over and filled that guy's gas can up, and then went back to filling up his tank. Now, that was sweet, wasn't it? That's a great story. I mean, just, warms my heart to see that. But the disrespect is there too. The, totally ignoring elderly people. We always, the old saying goes, respect your elders. I remember my best friend used to tell his son that. You better respect your elders. Well, that's where they get this from. We're to give honor to someone that's gray-headed, that's older, that's got more experience, that's been around a long time. Deuteronomy 21, let's go to this one here. I wanted to read this one because I think it's important that we read what God's Word says on this subject. The man that has a stubborn and rebellious son, which will not obey the voice of his father or the voice of his mother, and that when they have chastened him, will not hearken unto him. Now, he won't listen at all. Now, I'm going to take a time out here, and I'm going to be careful walking through this scripture here. Let's see what it says. Then shall his father and his mother lay hold on him and bring him out to the elders of the city and the gate of his place. And they shall say unto the city, elders of the city, this is our son, is stubborn and rebellious, and he will not obey our voice. He's a glutton and a drunkard, and all the men of the city shall stone him with stones. That is, again, that's harsh treatment, isn't it, to even contemplate. But also, how many children in Israel acted this way? God was forming a nation here. He was brought them out of the land of Egypt, and he was beginning to create a nation. He was laying down the rules whereby they were to follow to be a successful and a thriving nation. You missed the part where you think, when you read this story, you think about a little bitty child. They're going to take this little bitty kid, take him out to the city gates and stone him to death. But look what it said. It says that he's a glutton and a drunkard. This is not a little bitty kid they're talking about. This is an adult child that's grown up. He's probably in his late teens, and he just absolutely will not behave himself. But he's also disrespectful and rebellious, not only to his parents, but to God as well. And like I said, it's a harsh thing to even contemplate. But the message that this sent to all the parents, and in Israel during those days, I believe that harsh sentence would have, it's like the threat of discipline. You remember when you were a kid, your mother used to tell us, when your daddy gets home, it wasn't the punishment itself, it was the threat of punishment that made us get in line. And I believe there was some of that going on here as well. Parenting is probably one of the most difficult jobs a person will face in his lifetime, because you hold in your hand a new life, another person which you are responsible. And I guess in some ways you're responsible for the way they're going to turn out. All decent parents want things better for their children than they had. I want my kids to have more than I had, or better things than I had. But most of the time, we're learning as we go, because we're children when we have children, and often, in most cases. I had no idea about parenting when I had my first child. I tell you, I was learning as I went. I made horrible mistakes. It's like stepping out on the ice for the very first time and going ice skating. You know how you're flopping and flipping and your legs go up one way. I remember skating across the ice and thinking I could step right out onto the carpet at a skating rink one time. And that first step, you know what the next step was? It was my skate and then my chin hit the floor. I fell for 30 minutes over there. And people were laughing at me. What kind of idiot is that? Thinking he could step off. Parenting was that way for me. I had no idea what I was doing. I was learning as I go. But here's the wonderful, beautiful thing about parenting. Children will follow you out onto the ice. And they think you're the greatest skater in the world. Children are very quick to forgive all your blunders and your faults and your foibles, your failures. They don't see that you're out there making a fool out of yourself. They just say, Dad, you're the greatest skater I've ever seen. Man, you're my hero. That's the way kids are. They forgive and they forget, try to forget most of the things that happen. I believe that's why Jesus said that we're to become like little children, because they have the greatest faith in us. If they only knew how terrible we were at the job. But they do. You know, it begins with training, I guess. Training a child as early as possible, I believe, at home, as young as you can. And it isn't the responsibility of the school. It's not the responsibility of the state. It's not the responsibility of the government to rear your children. It is your responsibility as a parent to teach your children, because they're your children. The training begins at home. You know, Deuteronomy, the 6th chapter says, well, let's turn there. We're right here in Deuteronomy. Maybe we could read that together. Deuteronomy, the 6th chapter. Deuteronomy 6 and verse 5. It says, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. That's speaking to the parent here, and eventually the child. And all these words which I command you this day shall be in your heart, and you shall teach them diligently unto your children. And you shall talk to them when you sit. Most people won't even carry on a conversation with their own children. Oh, go over there in the room and play. Here's the digital device. Get busy watching that while I watch my baseball game. He says, when you sit in your own house and when you walk by the way, when you lie down and when you rise up, every moment, every day, you're constantly checking and teaching your children. And you shall bind them for a sign upon your hands and the frontlet between your eyes. In other words, you're to talk to your kids about, it says you remember during the time of the Passover, it says when your kids ask, why do we do this? You remind them it's because the Lord brought us out of the land of Egypt and gave us all these wonderful blessings and fed us with manna and all of that. You just teach those things so that they'll remember. And even it talks about your children's children. It says a man's supposed to lay up for his children's children, so that they will have a great start in life. Lay up for your grandchildren. In Proverbs, the 1st chapter, it says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. I guess there's a lot of grown-up kids that need to know that lesson or learn that lesson, including the one standing up here behind this microphone. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Proverbs gave a lot of instructions to children. It tells us that David, upon his deathbed, even told his son, if you'll do everything that God commanded you, as you will be blessed as I am, and you will go on and live, and you'll do everything, and your seed will continue on the throne as well. It was a very beautiful promise. And of course, the famous one, train up a child in the way he will go. And when he's old, he will not depart from it. I think the key there is when he's old, because kids are going to be rebellious. Teenagers are going to be rebellious. It's a phase that they go through. They're going to disobey you. They're going to go out and test the waters. They're going to go off the grid, whatever. But if you start young, they will come full circle. I know. I've proven this. I've seen it happen in my own life, the lives of my children, and hopefully in my grandchildren, I'll see the same thing. I've seen friends of mine and their children that I thought were the rottenest little monsters I ever saw. You know, your kids are always perfect. Other people's kids are rotten monsters, aren't they? But I've seen some of these kids grow up to be some of the finest men and women I ever met in my life because their parents were found it. They didn't get it all right. And you know, our kids can see our faults before we do. But they certainly will grow up to be good citizens. I want to read some of these. Proverbs, the 1st chapter and verse 8. My son, hear the instructions of your father and forsake not the law of your mother. For they shall be an ornament of grace upon your head and chains about your neck. My son, if sinners entice you, and of course he goes on in the rest of this first part of this chapter, he talks about don't go with the evildoers. Don't put your lot in with the wicked guys or all the guys that are going to go out and do something evil. You stay away from them because it's going to get you in trouble. And your life may depend on it. He warns him of that. Down in verse 31, he says, he talks about gaining wisdom, but look at what he says. Therefore shall they eat the fruit of their own way and be filled with their own devices. They're going to go that way. If you follow them, it's like the old saying, you know, you're going to, my mother used to say this, if he jumped off a cliff, would you jump off the cliff with him? I mean, you're going to follow somebody to destruction, and it's going to be revealed in their own way, in their own devices. There's going to be a penalty. In Proverbs, the 3rd chapter here, we'll read a couple more of these. My son, chapter 3 and verse 1, forget not my law, but let your heart keep my commandments. For length of days and long life and peace shall they add to you. Now that's great advice for a young man who has no direction. You know, a lot of our young people they have no goals. They don't have any direction in their life. And at least if you give him these things, he will have some foundation. He'll have some legs under him. Chapter 4 and verse 1, maybe we'll read one more here. Hear ye children the instruction of the Father and attend to no understanding. For I give you good doctrine, forsake ye not my law. For I was my father's son, tender and only beloved in the sight of my mother. I pause here to say most people don't remember what it was like to be a child. We should try to remember what it was like to be a child. You know, you're standing there looking up. Everybody's way taller than you. You remember that feeling? I wonder when I'm ever going to be that tall. You think I'll be next year? Or Mom, when am I going to be old enough to drive a car? You have a whole different outlook. Parents treat their kids like they're little bitty grown-ups. I told you to do that. If you don't do that again, I mean, here come the rules, and the kid is like, he don't even know what he's going through half the time. You have to gently explain to a child because they don't understand their own feelings. They don't understand that they've got human nature that's raw, that's out there, and they've got to overcome these things. They don't understand any of that yet. You got to do it patiently. Remember that we were children once, and we can't expect our children to act like grown-ups, even though we would like them to on some occasions. They are children. Proverbs, the 6th chapter, and verse 20. Proverbs 6 and verse 20. My son, keep your father's commandment and forsake not the law of your mother. Bind them continually upon your heart and tie them about your neck. When you go, it shall lead you. When you sleep, it shall keep you. And when you walk, it shall talk with you. For the commandments is a lamp, and the law is a light, and the reproofs of instruction are the way of life. I wish that young man that committed this heinous crime understood and knew these scriptures here. You know, I truly do. But there's a lot of children in our world today that have to go through, terrible tragedy, or that commit horrible tragedies because they have raw human nature. They have tendencies that, children have tendencies of selfishness, of lying, cheating. Did you ever steal anything when you were a child? Do you ever tell a lie? Throwing fits, but they have to learn how to control their feelings and how their attitudes. A friend of mine we were out at lunch the other day, and he was telling me about his grandson. He said, I took my grandson to Walmart. We were going fishing together, and we got in Walmart. We were going to buy a few supplies, little fishing supplies, and we were going to go fishing together. And he got in there, and he started telling me, I want this, and I want that, and I want this. And he said, no, we're here just to get these fishing supplies. And the little kid just kept on, and he threw a fit. And he said, okay, I'm going to give you two choices. You can either change your attitude, and we'll go fishing. And if you don't, we're leaving and going home, and we're not going fishing. And the little kid, given the choice, decided, you know what? I think I'd like to go fishing. And he went fishing. I thought it was well done by the grandparent. This was a grandparent. He said his children do not, they don't control their kids. He said they just run wild. And I said, well, all kids have the tendency to do that. I said, I've got some grandsons, and I can't keep control of them either. But I said, I thought you did a good job by giving him a choice, to either go one way or the other, and he picked the right way. Isaiah warned us that because of lawlessness and the rejection of God, that there would be, certain actions and behavior of our children. In Isaiah, the 3rd chapter, I'm going to read just one verse here, and we'll move on. Isaiah 3 and verse 5. Or 2 verses here. And the people shall be oppressed, every one by another, every one by his neighbor. The child shall behave himself proudly against the innocent, and the base against the honorable. And over just a little bit, down in verse 12, I believe it is. As for my people, children are their oppressors, and women rule over them. O my people, they which lead thee cause you to err, and destroy the way of your past. So here's a prophecy here, I guess, about uprising children being disrespectful and, hating, not giving honor to those that are should have honor, their elders, if you want to call it that. I was sitting here writing this sermon this morning, and I was a little depressed of having to do it. And then all of a sudden I thought, what kind of child was Jesus? And I went right to Luke. I knew Luke would have this story for me because he recorded almost everything in chronological order. And I want to read a little bit of this, because we have read this from time to time, but I think it's apropos for today. He says, down in verse 41 of Luke 2, now when the parents went to Jerusalem every year at the feast of Passover, when he was 12, Jesus, 12 years old, they went up to Jerusalem after the custom of the feast. They were keeping the Feast of the Passover and the days of unleavened bread. And when they had filled the days and they returned, the child Jesus tarried behind in Jerusalem, and Joseph and his mother knew not of it. They didn't know that he wasn't with the caravan that was headed back home. But they, supposing him to have been in the company, went a day's journey. Now, I don't know how many times you left the house and didn't realize your kids were with you until a day later. You went and got in the hotel room, and then you go, oh, what? By the way, I think it was a funny movie about that, wasn't it? Where is the kid? Well, I thought you had him. Well, I thought you had him. Well, I guess we need to go back home and get him. He says, but supposing him to have been with the company, went a day's journey, and they sought him among the kinfolk and acquaintances, and when they found him not, they turned back to Jerusalem seeking him. And it came to pass that after 3 days they found him in the temple. 3 days now. You talk about being worried about a child now. I would imagine that would have terrified Mary. Sitting in the midst of the doctors, both hearing them and asking them questions. So he's carrying on a conversation with the rabbis. And all of them heard him, were astonished at his understanding and his answers. And when they saw him, they were amazed. And his mother said, "Son, why have you dealt this way with us? Behold, your father and I have sought you. We've been sorrowful. We've been anxious." And he said unto them, "How is it that you sought me? You knew that I must be about my Father's business." So, two things. I believe there's a couple of things here we can gather or glean from this story. One is Jesus was very responsible, wasn't he? Obviously, Jesus had proved that he was responsible, and children need to prove themselves to their parents that they are responsible. When the parent says go do something, they do it, and they come back and do exactly what the parent said. Otherwise, the parent doesn't have trust. My best friend and I, when I think we were sophomores in high school, maybe juniors, maybe even earlier than that. We just got our driver's license, so we must have been freshmen. We were working on his dad. His dad was building a brand new house, and his dad told us, "I need some more sheetrock. Y'all take the truck, you go straight to the lumber yard, and you come straight back." I mean, he told us that 3 times when we left. Soon as we got out of the driveway, my friend said, "We're going by the high school." And so we drove up to cruise by the high school to see if we could see anybody see us in this truck. So we were so cool that we were looking around and looking over the schoolyard and trying to see some of our buddies, and he ran that truck into another car. And his daddy's word came right to the very forethought of my mind. I thought, oh, he is going to be so angry with us because he told us to go straight over. And he made us look at him and say, yes, we're going to go straight over there and straight back. And that's not what we did. It's funny what goes through the mind of a child and how they can manipulate a situation and think that they can get away with it. Of course, his dad was furious about it, wrecked the truck, and he had to pay for that other car. And I mean, it just, everything went totally wrong that day. I was so embarrassed because I had a great deal of respect for his dad, and I wanted him to respect me, and I knew that day I'd let him down. I'd done my dad that way, the same way, several times too, and those were occasions that still live with me today, when he gave me responsibility and I let him down. I'm glad my parents and his parents were forgot all that, and they still think we're great young men somehow. I don't know how, but Jesus, during this day, these 3 days here, showed that he was very responsible, and his parents trusted him, and he was exactly where, well, maybe he wasn't exactly where they thought he was, but he was doing something very responsible when they did find him in the temple. And I think it says volumes about the kind of person Jesus was and how responsible he was, and he wasn't out getting into trouble and throwing eggs at cars or whatever it might have been going on. Ephesians, the 6th chapter, it tells us children to obey their parents, for this is right. Fathers, and it goes on to say, fathers, don't provoke your children to wrath. You need that good relationship where your kids can tell you absolutely everything. Or anything, or talk to you about anything. I grew up in an age where communication from a World War II veteran wasn't always the best. I just was. We didn't talk about things. And we try to talk to our kids. Now I try to go overboard with my kids. Dad, I don't want to hear all that, really. I don't want to know about that. But I make it a point to embarrass my kids sometimes, by saying, if it hadn't been for me and your mama, whoa, Dad, no, we don't want to hear about that. Sorry. Just, Dad, shut up. Don't say anything else. It tells us in Colossians that children should obey their parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing to the Lord. I'm giving this message here today not to justify by any means the evil actions of this demented 18-year-old who thought that taking innocent lives of all the people, that it was somehow justified because things were bad in his life. I'm not here to do that. To try to make a heinous public statement and to cry out from his miserable life by killing these children and the teachers is evil beyond belief. But the outcome, I believe, could have been a lot different. If his family and his parents and society and our nation had guarded and honored and harbored and held in high esteem the Word of God and the teachings of the Bible for the children and for the grandchildren that were coming, then the results may have been a lot different. To teach them right from wrong, to teach them good from bad, righteousness from evil, then maybe this young man would have had a bright future instead of the one that led to his awful death. And now the families that are there in that little town of Uvalde, Texas, are left to pick up all the tragic pieces. May God be with each one of those families and as they try to somehow heal. And may God's word be in the hearts of all of our children.